So, in thinking about structure and margins, or structure and excess, or remnant, or the other, or there's so many words. And this is why philosophy, they'll make terms and they'll be like, when I say death, I mean this very specific thing, and it's confusing, but it's quite necessary because what happens otherwise is that the synonyms just pile up. At any rate, I'm not being strictly philosophical, so synonyms it is. But in thinking about that idea of structure and margin, which I prefer to center in margin because, I don't know, I just feel like it's more clear what I'm actually saying. Because there's a structure that's patterned in a certain way, and that's a structure with a shape, and then there's that which is from the perspective of it, outside of it. Anyway, I was thinking about something that I do, at least right now, as I'm kind of doing deconstruction and reconstruction, and in a pivotal point in my own personal journey, which is that I will kind of so there's very you might say dominant elements to my personality, to the way that I spend my time, to my priorities, all of that. For a long time, I've been very much, in books and analysis and art and language and kind of the realm of symbols more than the realm of things. And also kind of very careful and deliberate with the way that I do things, thinking about the impact that I have, etc., etc. And you could say that's kind of the way I'm built naturally, predominantly, but that's not a very balanced way to be. And that's like the structure, that's what the broad impressions that you're gonna get of me. Um, but I'm also trying, well, I do balance that out. And in order to balance it out, I kind of just basically try and do a 180 because a balance is tension between two opposing forces. It's a synthesis. It's not something that's just like, oh, you go in the middle and see, It's a matter of tension, and opposing force is balance. So basically, a lot of the time I'll just do a 180 and kind of be like, nah, like, I don't care. I just go with whatever. Or like, nah, I don't care about, you know, uh, the philosophical implications of the choices that I'm making or like anything. Like, I'm just here to be here, etc. Basically, formulating intentions and descriptions that are well highlighting the margin and the opposite principle of the principles that I kind of actually live by most of the time. And hiding, therefore, highlight and hiding, therefore, the bulk of it. And the bulk of it kind of goes without saying, because this is what I figure. So if I'm self-describing, a lot of the time I will not, because you have the structure and the margin and the opposite balancing force, right? And when you're self-describing, when you're setting a deliberate intention or you're formulating a description of yourself, you are kind of giving strength to one or the other pole. And it is not only an act of description, but also kind of an act of creation and an act of emphasis. And it's something that is a gesture that has a kind of, there's a word that I'm looking for. Is it diegetic? I don't think it's that. Something like that. Actually, I should find out. It's not diegetic, that was something else. Whatever, it's a linguistics term, like a speech act, where, if you say I pronounce you man and wife, that's not only description, but it's also like doing something and bringing something about. It has a kind of force to it. Anyway, if I'm self-describing, I will often focus on the hidden part, focus on the opposite balancing principle, focus on the margin. And so it'll be something like, I don't know, I'm just trying to have fun and be in the moment and go with the flow of things and enjoy them and not really, I don't care about the consequences of I'm very careless, I just do what I want to do and I don't really like worry about it or whatever. That kind of thing. And I mean, that's not technically very accurate to the way that I act overall. But to me, I still feel that that's true, and I still feel that it's important to describe myself that way and to set my intentions in that way. And again, because of the kind of balance that I'm trying to create. The the structure, the bulk of things, and the dominant kind of whole of things, that goes without saying. Even if I intentionally set myself to be very careless, to be very selfish, to be very um, focused on the physical world in the here and now, and I put every ounce of my conscious brain power and my self description toward that, it's just gonna pull me a little bit. Like the other stuff is still gonna be there, and it's still gonna go without saying. And what I'll end up is maybe somewhere in the middle, maybe. So, but if I was to go and say, but if I was to not only be in be controlled by the dominant forces kind of unconsciously and as a matter of course, but also I was to very verbally and constantly acknowledge them and acknowledge the status quo and kind of only speak about that, then I would be very much out of balance and like I would just, yeah. So, like, I was talking about the margin, the excess, the other kind of giving life to the structure, main structure, and being very important to it and that kind of thing. And that is how I feel about um, the proportions in my life. You have the very strong, like, tendencies and priorities and way that I have historically been for a long time that's very much ingrained and that is important and that does make me what I am. But then you also have, and that's like 80%, then you also have the 20% that doesn't fit with that and that pulls me in the opposite direction from that. And that 20% is kind of what's really precious to me and what I seek to nurture and what I seek to, you know, describe and value in myself and what I seek to. When I have conscious attention, I'll generally want to put that conscious attention not on the shit that I already know about being book smart and knowing about theology and stuff, but on the stuff that's a little bit weaker and that's a little bit that's on the margins, like um, you know, like my hobbies and whatever. I'm not gonna give details, but yeah. And so I feel like, someone might look at me weird for doing that because they're like, dude, you're very clearly one kind of person. Why are you, you know, um, but I still think that saying something like, yeah, I don't know. I still think that it's true if I let the structure and the main dominant stuff, it goes without saying. So I generally let it go without saying. And the thing that I'm putting intentionality into is the marginal and balancing elements. And I think that there's truth to that too. I mean, I don't think I'm lying if I don't think I'm lying if I okay, well, let me just give an example because I'm moving on to something else. But so, for instance, I am very usually quite deliberate with my words, actions, thoughts, etc. Um, and I'll think about the consequences, and I want to do it right, etc. That's the structure of things. Margins, balancing principle, opposite other principle being throwing everything to the wind, being very careless, and just doing whatever and whatever. If I am asked to formulate my my attitude on the subject or my intentions on the subject, I generally wouldn't say, "Oh yeah, I'm very neurotic, I'm very careful, I'm very like I don't want to give that, I don't want to feed that more. It's got enough." I'm going to say, "No, I just kind of do whatever, I say whatever, try to be honest and leave it up to, the universe. I just put it out there." And I think that's not untrue. And I know that the dominant kind of very careful and deliberate part of me is there, it's gonna be there, it goes without saying, and it'll kind of catch me. Very much so. I'm not just going to fall on the other side into complete carelessness just because I expressed that sometimes or put intention into that. But it's about what I choose. You have a kind of established highlighting and hiding, established within my personality, such as it is at the moment. And then you have that which I, with my intentionality on top of that, I guess it's a difference between the subconscious and the conscious, broadly speaking. With my conscious intentionality, that which I then choose to highlight, which generally tends to be this chiastic thing where I will highlight that which is hidden, I will strengthen that which is weaker with my consciousness. And that got me thinking about that, got me thinking about this one comment that I got. And I can't even find it anymore. But it was on my reaction to the Olympic pre-show, and someone was using this language that I'm using right now, of center and margin, of beauty, goodness, truth, of patterns, and the way that things manifest in the world within patterns. And within these, you have a structure and you have a margin and a self and another. This person was using that language in order to make a point, and I don't again remember exactly, so this is more about this perspective rather than the particular comment or person, but to make a point somewhere along the lines of marginal figures in society shouldn't be put in public places, so you shouldn't have the Olympics, which is this international public kind of celebration. You shouldn't have fat people. You shouldn't have queer people because they're, I don't know, disruptive to society, I guess, in this person's view. They're on the margins in this person's view. And that's a whole nother tangent, whether to the extent to which certain groups are or are not marginal, and it depends on your perspective. But anyway, you shouldn't basically have, and I'm not sure to what degree disabled people came into it, or like people of different races. Race was not mentioned, thankfully. But I don't know. I'm kind of like, well, do you think that like do you have problems with like people of color being put in public places in America? Like, are we going to take it that far? Like, where are we drawing the line? But anyway, the general idea was that it was like, hey, because of the way that the world manifests in center and margins, because we have this, you might say, average societal ideal That's the structure. And to my knowledge, the societal ideal of the Western world would be something along the lines of a young white man who works in the corporate world and is successful in the corporate world. I think that's about the structuring, the ideal of the structure, as I understand. Anyway, this person was basically saying because that's the way reality manifests, which is true in our imperfect world. That is the way that things are. You have a certain society and it has a certain structure and it has a certain kind of person that will move through it with ease, and then to the extent that you deviate, bell curve, to the extent that you deviate from that, you're gonna have a harder time and it isn't made for you. That's the way things are in this world at this time. And he was saying, they were saying, because of that, we need to maintain that. We need to, if we take someone from out here, from out of that bell curve and from out of that ideal structure, the people that we put on our pedestals should be, the ideal, or closer to the ideal, rather than out here, the stuff that doesn't fit, in order to protect and maintain that ideal, and in order to protect and maintain the structure. Which, to be honest, my skin crawls a little bit just saying that, but I am going to make a rational argument and not an emotional one about this. But I can see the logic. I can see the logic because, if you're thinking with certain logic about it, it makes sense that if you then have this structure and then you start bringing in elements from all over, from outside, you're gonna, the structure will collapse. But is that really true? Will the structure collapse, or will it be balanced and strengthened because the people or the elements that were on the margins, that are other, that are outside, were never as separate as they appeared? Because that structure is a very limiting structure. It's a structure that needs more than just itself, and it's a structure that has always been sustained by elements outside of it, because nothing in this world, everything's interlocking, and nothing in this world is a manifestation of pure order or pure chaos, or of a pure world and a pure wilderness chaos outside, deviance. Things are interlocked, and those outside elements have always been there, and they've always been important and vital. And when you bring them in, what if it makes things anti-fragile? What if it strengthens things? Instead of destroying the structure, what if you get a new, stronger structure? I think you can look at it both ways. And I know which way of looking at it leads to more human kindness and decency and less eugenics. Not that I don't think that this person was advocating for eugenics, but I believe that a similar logic was used to justify eugenics. And again, I think I'm going to use that as an example of this. We were talking more about information and messaging and kind of images and ideals, but I know this is something that I kind of watched a video or read about like eugenics and like genetic diversity. And the logic of eugenics being, well, you have this ideal, healthy person of, I guess, the dominant race in our country. Young, healthy. Yeah, you have this ideal, this structure. Now, is that structure a structure? Yes, it is. It is something that exists, okay? You're always, I don't know, that's a thing. But at the same time, how should we treat that thing? How should we, hold up. What are we gonna do with that? If we notice that certain traits give success, best success, it seems, in life, if they're at the middle of the bell curve of health or of societal success or of, the having strong, healthy children or something. What do we do with that? Do we trust that to itself and or do we try to really reinforce it even more than it's already enforced for fear that it should disappear? So because as I understand the logic of eugenics being, well, you have this ideal who's healthy, who's going to produce healthy children. So we want to pare out everything that's not that ideal. So we'll get more of that ideal. Seems logical. But what actually happens when you do that is you get real inbred, basically. And the fact is that humans, speaking genetically and speaking about the ability to resist disease, it's not about being attuned, it's not about being some perfect form. It's about diversity to be able to respond to a lot of different kinds of diseases and threats and mutations and whatever, and to be strong by being composed of a lot of widely different elements. So, actually, if you kind of take this pattern of the ideal healthy human too literally, and you try to bring that down into the enfleshed world by like saying that you on the surface, you don't fit by taking it so literally and bringing it down, things will just thin off and just like die off. And because that's just a very, very abstract pattern. I mean, that's not real life. Like, that's not real life. It's a very high level and shifting, but also very, very high level, like, image of health and happiness or whatever. And it's a kind of thing that's like made of averages and different things. It's not something that you're meant to take literally and go and say, okay, if you aren't the perfect Aryan person, you get out. Of course, that specifically is involved with racism, or, well, isn't at all, but like that specifically was involved with like and trying to annihilate certain groups. But even just like, okay, if you're not real healthy, then get out. If you're not, yeah. But that, yeah, it doesn't lead to, in practice, you may think it would work in theory because, whoa, we're making everyone more to this perfect. But that idea of the perfect image is very limited, and it's hiding a whole lot. That highlight by which you look at human health as being close to this ideal traits, it hides so much. Just because it hides it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. That's still real. But it hides so much. And so in the example of eugenics versus letting people live and let live and reproduce as they wish, the way to actually strengthen people is to let it be, because we can't control this. These are things that are beyond our control. I'm sorry, this part it's a lot of abstract, it's a lot of images and not really thought in words, but I hope I'm communicating about kind of taking this very abstract bell curvy type thing, making it into a box, and then trying to shove everyone into that box. In practice, it may make sense on paper, but in practice, it just doesn't work. Or certainly, it doesn't work in the example of eugenics, trying to maintain good genetics. Not only hurts a lot of people, but also actually weakens humanity genetically, because we depend upon our versatility, diversity, and every element is balancing each other out. And like those outside elements are still real, even if they don't fit into the literal center of the bell curve square pattern. They're still real. They're still contributing to the world in a real way. And let me see if I can do another example, because I guess what I'm trying to highlight is just two different ways of looking at the structure and the margin, looking at the way things manifest via structures, and then that which is outside of the structure. But how outside is it really? But yeah. and one of the ways is like, I guess you could call the conservative way, which is to take the centermost part of the structure and shore that up even harder than it's already shored up out of fear of losing it. And then the, I don't know, progressive, the non-conservative way would be to try and expand the center and to bring in, you know, the to make more room. You know, not necessarily violently. Although if people think that the Olympics pre-show was violence, there's simply like, okay, what can I say? But you know, not necessarily by destroying and leveling everything, because that's going to hurt everyone, and it's especially going to hurt the people that are already disadvantaged. But you know, the idea being not to shore up the center, but to let the center shore up itself, because there's already this snowball effect, and to give your conscious attention. The forces that be are already on the side of those who are at the center. We have some excess of conscious attention. We ought to put that toward the edges, where certain elements are, you know, out in the cold, so to speak. And structures are more resilient than you think. You know, it's okay. Chill out. So you see kind of like the parallel that I'm drawing with the way that I was handling dominant and marginal elements in my life. You know, I am, instead of using the principle, and I think there's times when it's appropriate to use either one. Of course, nothing's absolute. But at this point in my life, instead of primarily shoring up the center of what I already am and have established, I'm reaching out and using the excess of conscious intention and words and stuff that I have and energy to bring in and to focus on that which is outside of that structure. Have I stopped? Has the structure fallen apart? Have I lost my entire sense of identity? Have I forgotten how to think about theology? Clearly not. It's not just going to go away because there's a snowball effect. Again, the forces that be in my life already favor a certain way of being. My excess conscious energy doesn't need to go to shoring up that way of being that's already so stressed and already so advantaged and privileged in my world. It needs to go to trying to balance that out and to trying to bring in and create space for and give some extra love to elements that of me that are real and that are important, even if they're hidden, but that don't get privileged by my habits and the kind of already the flow of things. So another example of this, other than that and other than the genetic diversity thing, would be, let me see if I can do this, but say you have the nuclear family structure that is the current, it's pretty recent, but current dominant structure in the Western world. And that's an image that's there. That's a symbol that is there and that is a structuring narrative. It is. That is what it is. You have husband, wife, kids. Nuclear family. So, and then when you look at the world, you see lots of examples of that. Then you see, in the kind of bell curve, you see lots of places where that's different. You have divorced parents, single parents, siblings or other relatives raising kids, extended family being more involved in raising the kids, orphans who are, you know, in the social services thing, in foster care, adopted parents, and obviously gay parents, polyamorous families. You have a lot of ways in which this can deviate from the norm. And again, there's these two ways of addressing that. And the one way is to say, well, we have this norm is the societal norm, and that we can look at a lot of, you know, we can maybe look at the way that it upholds our society or whatever. There's a reason why it's the norm. We could go into social science, but I'm not talking about this on the level of social. I'm talking about it on a very abstract level. So I'm just accepting that for kind of what it is as the societal norm for whatever the reasons. Um, but we could say, well, that's the norm, and I want to shore that up as much as possible. So we've got to look, we're already losing it, and we got to make sure that, like, as much as possible, everybody comes in line with that. And that's what's important. Or you could kind of figure that if that is really the norm, if that is really the average best way, then I guess it is. So it's probably going to keep being the average best way, because that means that that's, I don't know, when you follow the path of least resistance, you get there. When you make the best decisions, you get there. And so you don't have to shore it up, or just the natural way is going to lead you there anyways. You don't have to shore it up, but instead we can put our attentions elsewhere and, maybe on people who can't do that. Because already, with the way that things are structured, with that being the norm, if you follow that norm, you've already got a path laid out for you pretty nicely. At least a lot more nicely than for people who can't or don't follow that. And so, with your excess energy, you would give that to people who can't. With an understanding also that those people who are on the sides of the bell curve and don't fit into that norm, they are people too. And they're part of the world, and they're part of the society. So they are a balancing element, and they're not just something to be paired off and paired off and paired off, because that way is death. I mean, if you try to cut and cut and cut away everything that doesn't fit, eventually you'll just cut everything away. You'll end with nothing. And I guess that's what we see, what happens in these in movements that really, really try and enforce a norm, because the way that life happens is messy and it doesn't perfectly fit norms. If you try to enforce a norm enough, you're going to you'll cut the obvious people, really bad criminals, or I don't know, who doesn't fit at all. But then you'll move in and in and in. And if your focus is on that norm and enforcing it, you'll move in and in and in and in. And finally, I don't know, the government officials will be executing each other for being thought treasons or something, as we see. Now, I've been talking in very abstract terms about very concrete social realities, and that's generally not ideal when you're actually trying to address those social realities, because things don't the whole point of this, is that things don't perfectly manifest patterns. Nor should they, because they can't, because that is not how reality works. There's always going to be some roughness and some texture to it. And especially when you come into the realm of like social realities and humans, you can't just take these very abstract concepts and just put them down and expect for a certain social situation to only be expressing one pattern. It's going to be many interlinked, plus, free will, or what that which transcends all patterns, however you want to think of that. So, and I guess all that to say, I think that, if someone has the perspective that, say, we shouldn't be putting fat people in lingerie ads because they don't conform. I'm sorry, it's just very silly to me. But I understand that people are genuinely afraid, and I get the logic of that as well. But we shouldn't be putting fat people in. I'm sorry, it's just really childish. In the end, it's really childish. But at the same time, it's not, because very much adults are doing shit with this principle. So, if someone comes at you saying, because of the symbolic world and the way things manifest in the world, we shouldn't be putting fat people in lingerie ads because they don't conform to the ideal of a healthy, attractive person, and we want to shore up that ideal, because what if we lose that ideal? Um, I think in that, or if you're asking, well, what do we do with people who don't conform to our ideals? With people who are disabled, physically or mentally, or with people who are terminally ill, or with people who are fat, or with people who are queer. What do we do with them? I would say that what you want to do in the actual realm of social stuff is not go into metaphysics, because, like, I feel like for actually dealing with social situations, what you need is just common sense and a more blunt instrument than trying to find one very, very exact and pure, very abstract pattern and kind of put it down in the situation. Because no one situation is always, because no one, you know, abstraction is going to really genuinely address those social realities. For instance, if I'm bringing things very much down to a practical level, what if we said, okay, so, using the example of disabled people, so the structure is abled people, the margins is disabled people. We want to celebrate the margins and make sure that, because the margins are important to the structure, because this is the way that the world works. And so therefore we're gonna, put every time there's a disabled person who's like, yes, you should be celebrated, etc. If you actually talk to real people, generally that's not what they want, because that gets into like fetishization. And then, if you are different, you're made to feel still different, just different in like a different way. And it's not good. It may make sense on paper that that's the principle that you're okay, we'll switch, we'll do a 180, and that's the principle that will well, you actually just need common sense and communication between people and empathy and very much more squishy and soft stuff like that to actually hash this out, in a social way. And so really I think the best response on the interpersonal level is something along the lines of fat people are people too, and they're gonna wear lingerie too. And why shouldn't we have lingerie ads that show them? Because they're real people in the street around us all the time, and they're our, part of our world. So what's the problem? And like, I don't know, like disabled people, they aren't some kind of great hero, and they aren't some kind of parasite, or like, I don't know, yeah, to be crushed. So, as much as possible, just try to treat all people like people and listen to them for what they need and want. And we're in a very limited and imperfect world, and we're always trying to work to be better, but people are people and deserve equity because they're people. And I think that's genuinely the best response. But and that's the response that's best going to actually help people, both in the structure and without the structure. But, if you want to give a more abstract metaphysical answer for it, these are some symbolic thinking reasons why that very common sense answer also makes sense from a symbolic thinking and from a theological and philosophical perspective. And why it also makes sense not only just as common sense based on human empathy and these kind of more soft skills that can get lost in the weeds at times, but it also makes sense in terms of what this commenter and many people talk about in terms of like structure and margins and societal stability and personal stability and conformance, adherence to a pattern, and once again, as with everything, it comes down to the heart, it comes down to the spirit, and it comes down to insight. So when you have an abstract pattern like this, like the center and the margins, and the ways that certain social realities fit into that and kind of express that pattern, there's not just one logical way to look at it and one, well, because XYZ and this is the way the world works, that means we need to do this and look at it this way. Sorry, too bad for you. Get out of our lingerie ads or you're going to destroy our society. Like, it doesn't actually logically. It's a matter of perspective. There's multiple ways of looking at it. And in the end, the way that you probably do look at it when you're presented with this idea of center and margins, and I see this so much in the different people who speak in these terms and yet use them to come to quite different conclusions. It doesn't depend in the end. It's involved with the internal logic of it, but in the end it depends on something quite beyond that, which is love, discernment, and vision and empathy, and I don't know, the kind of family you grew up in and what kind of attitude, you can't shut out all of that and pretend that it's only a question of the abstract principles by which the world works and they mean this, so this is what we got to do. It's way more complicated than that. And more living. Well, complex, I should say, and more living. And yeah, I think there's very common sense arguments to be made, and there's very high level metaphysical arguments to be made about it. But in the end, this does really demonstrate that principle that, if I have all of this, if I have the perfect vision into the truths of the facts of the world, if I have an understanding of symbolic theology, if I give my body to be burned, if I give all my goods to the poor, etc., and have not charity, it profits me nothing.